Hey, Kuan. Oh, I think you might be on mute.
How are you, John?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. Well, you got the old
Good.
corporate branding going
Yeah,
on.
I'm in the office today, first time.
Right.
Our third conversation, and first time you got me in the office.
Right, right. Well,
Yeah, it's back to the grindstone as usual now.
yeah. Well, excuse my impudence because I'm eating
Ah, that's
while we're
fine.
talking.
Yeah.
It was really kind of a back-to-back sort of day, so hope you don't mind.
No, that's absolutely fine. I was conscious when I suggested the time, it was probably bang in the middle of your lunch break, so that's absolutely fine.
No
How are
worries,
you?
no worries. I'll grab you whenever I can.
Yeah, yeah.
I
It probably
appreciate you.
works because I'm going to do most of the talking anyway. I think today. I think I've got to talk to you about infrastructure. Yeah,
Fantastic. Okay,
yeah,
so that's great. I'm glad you plan to cover that because that's definitely um, somewhat top of mind for me. And before we kind of dive into that,
yeah,
I guess, well, when I think of infrastructure, obviously there's and you saw my email just prior. Well, a
yeah,
couple of days ago. It's about reporting, measurement, analytics, that sort of thing.
yeah,
Test and optimize infrastructure. Um, I mean, for me, it applies as much to our fundraising work as it will be for digital comms.
yeah.
And so one of the questions I have is because, and over the next couple of days, I'm going to start having the global briefings with New York.
Cool.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah, we've had to postpone it a couple of times, and both us and them had to postpone. So we've been a little bit slow on the uptake there, but we're finally going to have the two briefings. First one's tomorrow evening, and then the next one will be next Tuesday.
Yeah,
And they're much more compressed. I mean, they're trying to cover a whole bunch of stuff in these 2 hours. So they've got all these different functions covering, like 10, 15 minutes each. And
okay.
I'm okay with that. I mean, again, one of the reasons is just to connect the people. And then,
Yeah,
we could have more incisive follow-ups on any given topic later on. But there was the whole kind of Drupal website, and they have this sort of platforms and analytics group. And so, when it comes to measurement, reporting, and all that for digital, who do I deal with? It's that sort of that's one question. And
yeah.
then obviously, kind of the more substantive stuff of what kinds of resources exist and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Some good questions. Cool. Well, I'll be able to answer some of those questions in this session. Some of them I probably won't be able to because particularly on the fundraising side, although I think Cesar spanned both fundraising and communications, his primary role was to support the measurement and reporting in conjunction with some specialist agencies that the team have recently started working with. I'm not quite sure who's going to take over that when he moves on, which I think he's scheduled to do later on this month, if I remember rightly. But Filippo will have the answers eventually. It might just be that there's not an immediate answer on who the specialist will be. I'm also not sure whether the DOC have their own measurement and analytics experts. I think they possibly do.
They do.
In certain
They
areas.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I've got here, I don't know if you can see my screen. I've got a presentation that I ran through with everybody in the region. It was now over 12 months ago that I ran through this, but much of it's still valid. Can you see that on your screen okay?
Yeah, I see. Great. And you can share this with me too, right?
Yeah, I'll share it with you afterwards. Yeah. So
Perfect.
I'm not gonna present this verbatim because it's quite a long session and some of it was interactive and it doesn't really work one-on-one. It was like geared around discussion and interaction. But but I'll go through it and pick out the bits that I think are relevant, and then just shout up with any questions, and I can try and elaborate as we go through. But the first thing, I don't know if I spoke about this on our first call. I suspect I maybe didn't get to it, but this first slide is a bit like a rainbow, but it's what we call the digital fundraising stack. And we call it fundraising, but it's not really just fundraising. It applies to all bits of digital across UNICEF. And what we're trying to do here is build out a hierarchy of how like everything that we deal with fits together. So, you know, starting with our objectives that feed into whatever the strategy looks like, the strategy feeding the tactical plans, and then that's spanning into what we've got here are 3 core areas that are infrastructure that we're talking about today, driving traffic and testing. And as you just pointed out, that you could in theory put testing under infrastructure because it definitely touches that, but we've kept it separate. And the main reason we did that was just to give it the focus that we felt it deserved. And then the ones below it you won't be able to read, but I'll go on to what they look like in the next couple of slides. So to kind of like take it down another level, so tactical plans, again, we've got the 3 areas: infrastructure, driving traffic, test and optimization. So under infrastructure, we've got like the technical side of infrastructure, we've got the team side, we've got stakeholders, we've got partners that we work with both internally and externally. Driving traffic covers audience, messaging, creative, media, measurement, and then testing optimization. You've got testing plan and measurement are the 2 key components, which is kind of a slight oversimplification. So I'm not going to talk too much about testing today, but the infrastructure bit is where we wanted to focus. And I agree that kind of it does cover part of this, but the infrastructure bit, we pulled out the technical component in particular, but also we wanted to talk about team, stakeholders and partners, because quite often when we talk about infrastructure with offices, people just get bogged down with like, you know, website redesigns and website content, whereas obviously, you know, we know there's much more to it than that. You know, you could argue that you don't really need a website to have infrastructure that's ready for fundraising or communications campaigns, because you know you can do a campaign with just a very simple landing page, which is why we've put landing pages on here, and also tracking is here as a key component. So Google Analytics, I think you guys have probably still got a bit of work to do on refining your tracking, but it's definitely coming together, and it's better than it probably ever has been historically. Does this make sense so far, sir? I know I'm going through this quite quickly,
yes,
but in terms
yes,
of
totally. I have to tell you, it gives me a nice warm and fuzzy when I see that the whole kind of testing and optimization is extracted into kind of this separate focus area, because that has always been kind of my philosophy to do things, is to you know, set things up in such a way, whether it's infrastructure or whether it's personnel and partners, agency and all that, set it up in such a way as to facilitate an environment and a kind of the you know, work process to facilitate proliferate testing and optimization. So to see that is also echoed and supported by global is a warm and fuzzy, I gotta tell you.
Yeah, good. Because in a way, part of me is thinking that testing optimization, it should almost, like, if this was drawn correctly, it would kind of sit under infrastructure and driving traffic, but also by itself as well, just so it still had that focus and it was clear that it touched everything. But you know, you get the point. It's there as a separate thing, but we know that it touches all those aspects. Yeah. And then on the team side of things, this is pulled out because obviously, like one of the key challenges, if you go back probably 5 years plus before I was involved in the capacity that I'm involved in UNICEF, there was definitely a push based on conversations I've had with other people who are doing similar work to what I'm now doing, to build up digital capacity in a lot of the offices, particularly country offices, where historically there'd not been a specific focus on digital. I think other fundraising programs were up and running, but digital was somewhat lagging behind. In a lot of the national committees, there were, you know, reasonably advanced programs. So there was a drive to do that. And I think now across the region and other regions, there's now probably at least one person in every office who is tasked with being the digital lead. You know, all with varying like experiences and backgrounds, but there's somebody there that's focused on it. So that's really good. There's been progress there. But then, you know, this question of like, well, how do we embed digital in the organization more widely? Because you know, one of the challenges again is that in those offices where it's more of an early stage digital presence, like they might be working with their face-to-face teams or telemarketing teams or direct mail, and you know, constantly facing challenges of how digital should support those traditional areas. You know, it obviously crosses over, whether it's iPads with face-to-face or making sure we've got a presence when there's a TV campaign out there or a big telethon. So it's like, how do we as an organization create an environment where digital gets embedded, which is, I think, kind of what we move into eventually, but it depends on the team as to where that's up to. I think, you know, some teams have a high level of engagement around digital. People are really interested. Other teams, you know, it might be more of an attitude of, oh, I don't really get that digital stuff. It's for the kids. We'll get an intern to do it. You know, so it depends on who you're talking to as to what their approach is. But I think the general push is to try and make everybody realize that they should be thinking at least a little bit about digital, probably in like a range of different ways, regardless of what their job is. Especially across fundraising and comms, you know, everything we do these days really touches it in some kind of way.
You know, I want to, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too far, but I want to, while you're on this topic of team and skill set and personnel in different country offices and programs and such, is because this has come up a couple of times already, namely yesterday and today. So, as you know, I sit in comms, but, you know, I have a big fundraising hat as well. One of the very, very useful activities, I think, for the comms team, and really for me personally, as I get oriented to UNICEF's work here in Indonesia, is we have had separate 2-hour sessions, like the comms team leads together with Terry, and each program cluster. Okay, so we've had these 2-hour exchanges where they're sharing with us kind of their plans for the year, just overall program priorities, you know, at a very high level, and then you know, getting down to, well, what are your kind of key advocacy goals? What are some of the key, you know, can you rank order, right? This mix of things that you're going to be engaged in, and what are some of the key moments, blah, blah, blah. So we've been doing that with each program cluster, and we're in the middle of that process. And, you know, digital definitely in varying ways has a role to play, not only with comms as it relates to, say, you know, certain sort of program objectives, you know, against a very kind of fixed target audience, you know, like local community service organizations, religious leaders. There's a little bit of a digital comms application there. Again, it varies from program to program. But I tell you where I've heard it come up time and time again is with things like, you know, digitizing training modules, okay? Digital toolkits for scaling, things like that. I've done a bit of work in such areas before. And in fact, I used to do some of this work with a colleague at CARE who came from the UNICEF Innovation Unit. He was based in Bosnia. And so I'm curious how, from what you've seen, those kinds of kind of digital offshoots and applications, you know, how have they been able to scale? Where do they sit in the context of country office?
Yeah, so I mean, this is one of the reasons why it's really good to have you in this capacity working across both teams, because quite often the conversations you've just mentioned, I've never really been involved in historically, because it's always been quite a separate function between fundraising and comms. So I think it's really good to hear that kind of process taking place, and the fact that you got visibility that digital's touching everything that is planned in the comms pipeline as well as fundraising. But in terms of how it's done in other offices, from a comms perspective, I probably couldn't give you too much insight. I've been involved in conversations, obviously, with various comms team members as part of visits, but there does tend to be this approach of, meetings, mapping out priorities, and then sharing different goals between different team members. But as to specific examples, I'd probably struggle. But I know Filippo probably could give you a bit more insight, particularly on the social side of things, where he's been heavily involved. But yes, I don't know if that really answers your question. It probably doesn't.
No. That I just wanted to throw it out there. Because it's certainly, and again, it was less about comms per se, because we had this opportunity to speak with all these program people, and a flood of ideas and suggestions, and as it will happen in a 2-hour fairly informal exchange, you start getting into this sort of not really digital comms for programs, but like D4D or whatever, digital for development. I mean, these are tools and applications and user experiences, that actually touch the program work. I mean, it's a whole other ball of wax. I mean, I know there was this innovation team and all that at UNICEF writ large, but anyway, I did say I didn't want to go down the rabbit hole, but I just thought I'd see what maybe you had some quick.
I'm not sure I do, but the innovation team that you remember that you mentioned, there's a lot of exciting stuff there that does really interest me personally. I've just never been involved in that team, and I think if you make the right connections with the comms people, you'll probably be able to get a bit more insight into what the focuses are. I mean, I've read about certain digital programs that team have done, but I even saw something last year that was related to, I think UNICEF invested in private businesses that had a development goal. Yeah, and I don't know where all that got to. I didn't actually end up following it that closely in the end, but it seemed fairly exciting and like quite a good idea for them. It was stuff that was going to benefit the work that was happening in the field.
Right.
But there's tons of that stuff out there, and that's one of the areas where we've talked about it was on, like, when we're talking to supporters about our work, there's an audience segment that is kind of like, tech savvy or tech enthusiasts or digital enthusiasts that would find some of this stuff really, really interesting, because it's applying digital innovation in a humanitarian context, which is kind of like super interesting. You get digital development in the commercial world attracts a lot of interest. So I think if you apply,
it's actually funny you mention an example like that, because that is something very similar to one of the examples that got raised in a meeting with the education team. UNICEF has been involved in, and this is held in Jakarta, the capital city and all that, has been involved in hackathons. Right, and so you get the sort of the UNICEF presence there. You get there's like a local company called Mar Coding that I guess is like big coding type I guess sort of education facility, and they put their name on it.
Sorry, Quan, I'm losing you a bit here. My connection, you're breaking up.
organize the thing of it. And just come up with and the marketing people actually try to implement the shit.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
sorry, I lost a bit of what you said there. My
yeah. No,
just
don't
breaking
worry.
up on my end.
Yeah. No, anyway, it was just kind of describing the hackathon thing. I mean, you get the picture, So
Yeah, definitely.
what happens here? UNICEF's associated with it. It's the sort of thing that gets lapped up. The government loves it, So it's not a ton of effort because you get these other institutions, kind of these coding institutes and all that put a lot of weight behind it. They organize the whole thing, but kind of the PR value and all that is sort of outweighs the sort of an outsized kind of publicity benefit.
Yeah, definitely. Like there's something, a good example of the PR value was there was an initiative. It was one of the European NatComs, I think, who were doing. It was like a Bitcoin mining initiative, so you could download a piece of software to your browser, and then it would turn your browser into a Bitcoin mining machine while you were inactive. It raised like naff basically. It was not really worth doing from a fundraising perspective, but it did generate a hell of a lot of publicity and a lot of interest. So maybe, on balance, it was worth doing because it brought people in and got them interested, hopefully in the cause, but through a slightly tangential route.
Right.
Well,
anyway,
yeah, cool. I'll continue. Feel free to dive into your lunch. Don't want it going cold.
Yeah, no, I've wolfed it down, so I'm good.
Oh, really? You finished already? Oh, God. Faster than I am, and that's saying something. All right, so just to zip through this, the other components of infrastructure again. So we mentioned team again, like we've gone into a side conversation there, but there's a lot of people potentially that we need to involve, and then stakeholders. So again, it ties into team internally, but also PFP as a stakeholder. The RSC, you've got even more stakeholders because you've got DOC and probably other teams that you would liaise with, who we've not included here. But
what's RSC?
The Regional Service Centre. So that's a guy who's based in Bangkok who you may not have met yet, Ben Loans.
I have had an email exchange with Ben Loans.
Yeah.
Just one email exchange.
Yeah, and Michael Newsom heads it up, and then they've got under Michael, there's a team of kind of relationship managers who each deal with a handful of markets. So Michael Copping and Gina Seato, and then Ben has moved out there recently as a specialist to support markets with anything fundraising basically. There was another guy called James Meader who's recently moved to Geneva from the RSC, so I think they're going to replace him. He was a tele-fundraising specialist, and I think ideally they'd probably have somebody who was a digital specialist in the RSC as well, who was doing more of the work that I do, but internalizing it to UNICEF.
So, I mean, other than the kind of one exchange that I had with Ben, and if I recall, it had to do with getting some insights into retention on pledge stuff. I mean, for the most part, right? I mean, I've been, dealing with you, with Filippo, and it looks to be the same on the comm side. It's, it's New York, right? I've had very little involvement with any of the kind of regional reps around digital, and it doesn't seem to come up a lot. Like when I talk to Gregor or Terry, kind of the regional thing doesn't really show up. I mean, I mean, I guess the question is, are they a resource to tap? Do I need to, is there something that maybe I'm missing, or opportunities that I'm missing, or whatever?
I'd say the dynamic is you'll find, I don't know quite how often it should happen. I think it happens about twice a year. You'll get your relationship person coming in from the regional office. And this will be a bit different for you because normally I see it from the fundraising side. So it would usually be Michael Copping, who looks after Indonesia. And I think that may be changing. So, don't be surprised if it's a different person who ends up doing it. He will come in. there'll be a series of meetings, usually over 2 or 3 days, where the team, with Gregor's presence as well, will be presenting results, plans, and then, probably a series of proposals or basically trying to get buy-in from the RSC and support for the plans ahead. I think probably what also happens, because there's a communications section within the RSC, so I imagine they probably come as well. The focus from the fundraising guys, though, tends to be, there's these investment funds that go into a market, and they're coming out to make sure the investment is on track. If there's changes to the plan, if there's support required. So if they're like, right, we've got this digital money, we've got this and this working, but we're stuck with this. That's where I come in, or where other consultants come in to support some of those questions and try and find a way through. So it's all about trying to make sure the investment funds are invested well and that the return comes through. But the dynamic really is to present to them a clear articulation of what's happened and what the plan is, but also use it as an opportunity to escalate challenges. So an example of that happens across all countries is where in the digital space they've had clear challenges, particularly Indonesia, with payment systems. But the difficulty that UNICEF has is because all the contracts go through the UN procurement system, everything takes a long time to get done. So you have this situation where people need to move to a new payment system quickly, but then they've got at least a 6-month lead time of doing it. They've then got them on board for 2 years after investing in a developer that integrates it. But then 2 years later, they may need to revisit the RFP just for the sake of it, because that's what the procurement rules say. So some of those challenges have been escalated, and they're starting to overcome them. But on a less arduous level, they're also there actually as well to share information and successes from other markets. So they'll give you feedback, that they've seen a similar initiative in another country that did or didn't work. They also interface with the other relationship managers that deal with other parts of the world as well. So they're usually a really good resource, and it's like a two-way exchange, really. The challenge for you will be there's usually a bit of work involved in prepping for those visits, because you need to usually do a presentation. But generally speaking, it's content that you would have already, because you've probably presented it internally to Thierry or to Gregor or whoever else is involved. It's just repackaging that for a slightly more external audience. Does that make sense?
Right. So, I mean, it's yes, it does. Thanks for that. I mean, so it sounds like it's more about the it's kind of the investment side. Justifying the investment ROI, things like check-ins, raise the challenges, as you said, some information sharing. So I kind of, from the financial side, it would seem that when it's sort of the harder support, like I need someone's help, that kind of thing. Ultimately, global, not from regional. Was that fair to say?
Yeah, no, I think you'll probably have a fair bit to do with the regional as well, because they will get involved in the strategic planning and things like that. So I'd check with Thierry. I don't know who it is at the moment who deals with the communication side of things in the regional service centre in Bangkok, and he will probably have a point of contact there. I don't, it depends on the relationships as well, because obviously I guess you've got DOC, but then there's also PFP from a fundraising point of view. So I think the RSC for you will still be valuable, and I think the kind of interface between the RSC and DOC will be similar to what we see with the RSC and PFP.
So you you said that FR RSC was Michael Copping.
Yeah, it was. I don't know if that's changed. I know there was some talk about it changing, but I think he's still the point of contact.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, great.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Cool. No problem. And then just to continue this diagram, partners. So we've got here media and technical, just to close that one off. But this is just really a broad way of thinking about like how we look at what we include in infrastructure. That's the whole purpose of this. So we covered this section. I'm not going to go through it one by one, but we're talking about, are you a digital chef versus a cook? And we did this spectrum basically. And the point of this, and I don't know if the message came across to people, but it's got Heston Blumenthal at one end, who's this, the crazy, have you heard of Heston? He's like a crazy food scientist who basically goes off and does all these amazing concoctions with food. He always uses
I don't know. I don't know this guy. Who is this guy?
He's just a crazy chef who's like a very scientific chef that goes and does loads of experimentation, like with all his dishes. They're all like really novel things. So you've got things here, make this a bit bigger. I think these are actually savory things disguised as ice lollies with, forget now, it's so long ago that I did this. Oh yeah, I've got it in my notes here. It's a savory ice cream with egg and bacon. But he goes off on a tangent and makes these like ridiculous concoctions, and he'll serve up a meal like on a board that's like, it look like AstroTurf, but the turf will be edible. Anyway, going off on a tangent there. But then at the other end of the scale, you've got like what I've just called a cook, who takes a box of ingredients and follows a recipe. And the point we're trying to make here is that, particularly in the fundraising space, because of this, like the investment funds and the 3-to-1 return, what we can't afford to do in digital is just be a cook, because there's not really a recipe for us to follow. There's not a proven approach that will generate results in every market, but we don't want to be a crazy scientist either, because we haven't got the investment funds to allow us to do that kind of dangerous experimentation where things will probably fail way more than they succeed. We need to be somewhere in the middle where we're still experimenting, we still get failures, but we've got a higher chance of success. That was kind of the message we were trying to communicate here.
Okay.
I don't know if that kind of makes sense. Yeah. So it was like, yeah, just be a chef in the middle. Experiment, but use a science that you've already got access to in terms of what works well together.
Some of the outputs to the dog.
Yeah, the stuff that doesn't work. Goes to the dog, and then serve the winning dishes to their audience. So yeah, it's basically saying don't be Heston.
Right.
Be a bit of both. But this we can references this quite a bit. I don't know if he still talks about this, but it was like the formula, as much as we've got a formula for success in fundraising, was like at the very beginning, we need to invest, which is you're doing this in Indonesia. So that box is ticked, the money's coming in. The time is starting to happen, and the management focus is part of the reason, why your role now exists, because the senior managers there are focused on it, including the rep, whose name I forget, the Italian lady, Deborah, that's the one. Yeah. So like she seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, whenever I've been in and we've met her, and we don't always get to meet the country reps because they're such high and important people in the organization, but she always seems really engaged and has lots of questions on digital, so it's a really good thing. And obviously
I think that from the digital standpoint, I've heard it from both Gregor and Thierry that she is a big supporter.
Yeah, which is great. The infrastructure, you've made a lot of improvements to that. Wican's been very involved in changing payment systems. There's still a bit of work going on, which is coming to a close. Obviously, the new main website went live, the DTP site, and the analytics is almost there, bar one or two niggles, I think. And then
the analytics on the Drupal site. Or are you talking about the analytics on the
across both, really? As far as I'm aware, they're both working, and the niggle I refer to is really how they interact with each other.
Right, it's that whole thing that we were diving into with the cross-domain and the referrals.
Yeah.
I think for the most part, that is there. You know, I mean, I think we do want to close the loop on that just to make sure we know how to use it and interpret it.
Yeah.
Yeah, otherwise, you know, again, we're only as good as that weak link. But I think there are still a couple of things, you know, for the Google Analytics, for example, to pick up the revenue field from the donation page. You know, right now, it's either a 0 or some fixed constant value, which, you know, again, is minimal use. It doesn't sound to me like that is a big deal. You know what I mean? Picking up the revenue field from the donation pages and then, you know, putting it in the GA report.
Yeah.
I mean, the reporting interface is there. It's so great to be able to track that on that interface.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose the question I've got for you on this, and because I kind of lost where I was up to because I left it with Cesar and co to deal with. Did you ever get an answer on the cross-domain tracking? Have
I
they
did not.
helped you
No,
configure? No.
no, I did not. You saw the email, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and when we were on the call that day with Filippo, he said, "Oh yeah, Kuan, I saw the email. Haven't looked at it yet, but and then I think after the meeting, I kind of sent one more follow up and say, hey, you know, Filippo, the detailed question for Cesar is in that other email.
Yeah.
Now the Cesar data has come and gone, right? I mean, he's gone. Is that right?
I think pretty much. I think he might have a few days left,
Okay.
but I think he is pretty much done. So,
So maybe, yeah. Maybe
what I'd recommend doing on it, if you follow up again with Filippo and CC me, and I mean, I'm sure he's got it on his list of things to do, but it'll just help him prioritize it. Because
yeah. I will do that.
Yeah.
After the call, great.
Yeah, one of the things they've got in PFP is they've got a whole list of vendors who can help with this sort of stuff, myself included. But I've been specifically instructed not to be doing analytics implementations for people, only dealing with the strategy and planning side of things. So that's just to help them plan their resource and all that kind of stuff. So mention it to Filippo. I think they've got a couple of vendors that they're working with. They're definitely doing some work in India on tracking. So he can put it in the plan of action to get it dealt with.
Perfect. That's music to my ears. I mean, great. So I'll follow up on that, and then that's. I'm so glad to hear you say that, because for me it represents. I mean, there is a resource. Just need to kind of connect the dots and describe what the problem is, and then we'll take that path. The other thing that I wanted to allude to, you talk about infrastructure, i.e., landing page bullet, analytics bullet. Yes, I would say the Google Analytics appears to be pretty close to done. I mean, I can kind of see it and say, look, that's not too bad. Yeah. I mean, I think why I spent so much time talking about it in the last email was because other than the Google Analytics for the main website and the donation website, all of the other stuff having to do with the driving of the traffic and the media agency and all that, that is still a TBD, right? I mean, we're starting to work with Limestone. I've seen some of their reporting. I would say it's marginally adequate. But again, it's detached, and so the idea of trying to integrate some of it just to reduce the staff time, in order to extract those insights. I mean, I think that's huge.
Yeah. Yeah. So on this, you kind of you've circled back a bit as a country, because you know, obviously you've had media agencies in the past and you've done a lot of work. Wickham's done a lot of work over the past couple of years, but with different partners. So yeah, this kind of whole process now resets. Now you're starting up with Limestone, so there's going to be a bit of groundwork to do. And I think the countries that are really successful in this area, particularly China and Korea. China stands out actually at working with agencies. They have a very thorough way of going in, which Indonesia have followed in the early stages. I'm not sure where it's up to at the moment, but going in, telling them all about the work we do, but then also coaching them in the way that we want them to work. And obviously different agencies are different in how they respond to that. Some people have very fixed ways of working, but I guess the point is, like what we see happen a lot is that agencies start focusing on their own KPIs. So for a fundraising campaign, they start focusing on reach rather than conversions, and those sort of things. Or maybe they don't understand a monthly donor is much more valuable than a one-off donor, or they worry that actually the return is either too low. In other words, they expect us to be making 10x on every donation, whereas the reality is if we break even on a first donation, it's actually, you know, kind of good when you look at the lifetime value. So some of those education pieces, but not only that, when it comes to the ways of working in terms of planning and experimentation, you know, really coaching them, because
exactly
yeah,
what you just said. Yes.
okay, good. We're on the same page, because like generally I think as well, like we have the agencies we work with, like most of them come across really, really well at pitch, but then they take on the work and inevitably they will probably hand it over to one of the more junior members of the team, or all the team are junior. So this coaching is usually, I think, well received because they're interested in learning about us. And it's a really good opportunity to build a relationship and hopefully squeeze a bit more value out of the agency as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, you know, I'll say it again. I mean, I think kind of the advice and coaching that you and Filippo gave to me the last time about, there were several big pointers I took away from that, you know, sort of hop around conversation. But one of the key ones was how essential it would be to work very closely with Limestone or with any agency partner, literally and figuratively, you know, just
Yeah.
and so I'm taking that to heart. I've already kind of set the expectation with the team internally here that initially, you know, we're going to be speaking with them 2 to 3 times a week, first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
You know, Monday, Wednesday, Friday on one week, and Tuesday, Thursday the next. Kuan will join once a week, you know, and we'll, you know, make sure they, as you've just listed, folks, on the right KPIs, you know, actually set up these tests as we want to. Don't shortchange the testing process. In parallel, do the hard work it takes to set up the reporting and measurement infrastructure, you know.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of that, and they might hate us for it, but you know, that's sort of the balancing act, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and moving on to the next bit as well, like, you know, once you've launched, again, to go into the testing cycle of analyzing, investing, retesting. So the point of this slide in the presentation was just like, yeah, you've got to do these things first to get ready to go. Then when you go in, you've got to be continually investing. In reality, like quite often what we see happen is, you know, people will go live with only part of the infrastructure ready, or the analytics isn't quite right, or you know, maybe they haven't got management focus, but they're trying to prove the concept to get management focus. So like it's a bit of a perfect scenario, this, but you know, it's obviously possible to do it a bit separately. So I'm just going to skip through some of these things because I think you probably know a lot of this stuff already about planning, getting the partners in place. Oh yeah, this is the other thing as well. You've probably heard of this a little bit. You know, if we're launching a campaign, don't try and like build the car straight away. Start with a skateboard, go to a scooter, go to a bicycle, then a motorbike, then a car. So we're iterating and trying to find something that works, and that ties into that thing being incomplete. You know, potentially on the first page where, all right, we've got a crap website, we'll do a landing page. okay, the tracking's not quite working. Let's compromise on that and just measure goals rather than e-commerce and launch what we can. And then going through to the actual campaign development, you know, like what can we pare back so we're not spending our entire life in an endless planning cycle to get things perfect.
Totally agree.
Yeah. And my worst experience of that was at working for News Limited here in Australia, and we launched a subscription product. And because it was a big brand, it was a recipe website that everybody in the country just about knows. They wanted it perfect, so they're scared if this product's not perfect, it's going to cause loads of reputational damage. And they spent probably over 18 months building it. We launched it in month 18, and all the capital investment budget was burnt by then. And then we got a ton of feedback from customers who were really engaged, but we couldn't change the product, or we couldn't change it fast enough because there was so little money left. All the developers had moved on to the next project. So you're stuck with this thing that is actually, it looks really good from a presentation point of view, but it's actually missing half the features or benefits that customers want. So it's really frustrating. So, you know, starting earlier, and if it had been a startup business, there's no way you would have spent $2 million of capital budget before you even launch something. You would have spent like 10 grand, launched something very basic that just about works, and built it out from there. So, and I'd heard this principle before I went to that job as well, but anyway, it still happened, but it was kind of good to experience it firsthand. Yeah, and then we talked a bit about mobile design principles. I'm not going to go through this; it's a bit technical, and again, you probably know it. But what I will show you, because I think this is super important. Are you okay for another 10 minutes, by the way, before you go on to your next thing?
Good. I'm good until I've got one of these program cluster meetings. Let me just double check. Oh, how do I get out of it? Let me just think. At the end of your meeting, I've got another half an hour. So
cool. I won't go into that because I've got another call shortly after, so I won't. I'll try not to go over too much for your sake and mine. But I'll show you a couple of examples just to bring things to life. I think in the call with Filippo and I the other week, we possibly mentioned taking people on a journey, and probably a bit vague about it in terms of how to engage with somebody online. You know, that the common practice for fundraising is that someone sees an ad, they hit a landing page, and we slap them with a donate ask, like we're selling shoes or something, and try and optimize the experience that way. Whereas we've got a few examples here that I'll show you of like how we think it's been done much better. Some of them are UNICEF examples, some of them are not. Can you still see the screen?
Yes.
Can you see the thing animating? Is it loading?
Yeah, it's a little small, but I do see the searching for Syria, UNHCR.
Yeah. And is it scrolling down the page now?
It is. It's sort of like some visual storytelling thing. I can't see what it is.
I'll share this link with you afterwards, but this was one by UNHCR. It was done in conjunction with Google, so actually the production quality on this is really high. I'm not suggesting that we aim for this necessarily as a launch, but it kind of goes through a whole series of like telling the story of Syria, like what was it like before the war, and saying people were searching for Arab Idol, bodybuilding, Miley Cyrus. And then it talks about further on that Syria had more tourists per year than Australia, which I was really surprised at.
Wow.
And then he goes, you know, boom, basically the war started, and this is the destruction. These are the like the national buildings of significance that are now destroyed. This is people being displaced, and goes on to tell a story of what's happened. And I don't really think this was actually a fundraising campaign, but it does lead through to a fundraising ask at the end. I think it's probably slightly long from a storytelling perspective, but what it does really well is the mobile storytelling, in that it's very short snippets of information, and very slick and easy to interact with. We're not just hitting somebody, dropping them on a landing page with 10 pages of scrolling text, where we could have said the same thing, but it would have been dull. It wouldn't have been anywhere near as engaging.
Yeah. Oh, I see what these things are now. They're the Google searches.
Yeah, that's it. Some of it's based on Google data. Yeah.
More, but I see what it is now.
Just because it's partnership with Google, they've told the story of how it changed from, at the beginning, people were searching for this related to Syria. It doesn't go on to say what they're searching for now, but the assumption is it's like, well, what caused the conflict and all the rest of it. But Yeah, it just shows how much of a normal place it was before it all started, basically.
Yeah.
But then the other example I've got is, oh yeah, so going through this, yeah, you go through, you can donate at the end, but they kind of break it a little bit, because what happens is you go through the really well optimized experience, and then it asks you on the clicking the donate button, oh, it looks like you're in Australia, you've got to click again to get to Australia. Then when you're in Australia, you've got to go to another page before you even get to the massive long donation form that they want you to fill out. So even though the front end's really good and compelling, they kind of lose it a little bit towards the end. So they probably could have optimized it further. But hey,
Uh-huh.
it was still a good campaign. This is the one from China that we've probably mentioned, where this just takes a second or two to load. And again, it's a dedicated mobile experience. It's not quite as I've translated this to English as well, so it doesn't really make sense. But it gives you a feel for how they presented it. You know, it's a picture of a girl on the first page and a bit of context around her backstory. The fact there's a child welfare officer helping her. The fact that her life has improved, that she now gets to play, that she now gets to go to school. And I think this puts it in context around other children in China. And this one's a bit broken, but it's just more information on UNICEF's work in China. But the whole principle of this screen's a nice one where it kind of animates the impact across the country. You see how slick it is, like between each page. It's just like, I get a page of information, I press the arrow, I go on to the next page, press the arrow, go on to the next page. And it's chunks of information, and it almost makes you want to go through the full experience.
Yeah.
When you do eventually decide to donate, which hopefully people do, it gamifies it a little bit, so you can actually shake the phone to randomly select a dollar amount, which could be dangerous, but they've done all sorts of testing on this, from like putting a love symbol near the dollar handle and all that kind of stuff. And then it takes you into the donation form experience.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it's really slick. But the team in China who developed this is kind of iteration number, God knows, like 10 or something. They started off with something similar in principle in terms of like mobile optimized, but it was a much shorter journey. But they test and test and test, and in a way for them the testing is easier because they've got this critical mass, like they've got so many people coming through. But they, in the early days, if you look back at the performance of their campaign, it wasn't stacking up. They had to brave the kind of waters of not getting a 3-to-1 ROI to get it to work over the longer term. But they did that based on a much smaller investment. And now they come to PFP and they ask for like $2 or $3 million at a time to invest in media because they know it's going to work.
Wow.
But that's just to help you visualize that. Again, we can send links to it. It's probably, well, it's definitely changed actually, because they've now weaved in this ring proposition that they're focused on. But the really good thing is they have truly adopted this culture of testing, and everything they do revolves around, well, let's not just do it, let's A/B test it. But not only that, let's make it like game-changing tests. So it's not just small things, like it's things that we know are going to have a significant impact. And kind of, so what if we don't know which specific minute detail changed the performance? All we know is that, you know, this performed better than this by quite a big margin, so we can continue with this, you know. And I'm talking on a page-by-page basis that they're doing this sort of testing. So it might take the form of completely changing the presentation of the dollar handles on that screen, rather than just doing minute tests.
Right. Well, no. So that's an important. I want to make sure I understood that.
Yeah.
Because I have come across other kind of testing philosophies where they're, you know, very clinical and you know, kind of classical sort of experimental setup, right? Where you're only varying one element, that kind of, so you know exactly cause and effect. You just said they don't actually do that. They do radically different things. So they don't identify the discrete element, but they just know A did better than B, we'll go with A, like that.
If I'm honest with you, they do a combination. So some of the tests they do are kind of minute detail tests. So the example on the dollar handles, they've done that test where does adding the shake it functionality versus not having it improve performance, and also having a love heart over the dollar symbol. And is it the number 8 that's lucky in China. I'm trying to remember which
Yes, it
number it is.
is. Yep.
Yeah, so
Yep.
I think they had donation amounts that start with 8, or
Yep.
have more 8s in them, and that had an impact as well. But also, like, this premise of, because if like, even China, to be honest with you, some of their tests run for 3 months and they're still not significant results. So they do have failures in terms of testing. And if you talk to Alan about this in China, he's reinforced it. If you just constantly make small changes, then the relative impact on conversion rate, is it going to be enough to make a statistical difference or a significant difference in that test in a short enough period of time to make it viable?
Yeah.
So what we'd encourage most markets to do, and I suppose Indonesia, you're in a good position because you've got a good population, good sized population, but at the same time, you can't afford to burn through your budget too early. So you do need to do probably bigger tests against smaller numbers of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, I get that, if you're like an Amazon or a YouTube, you can afford to make, like, minute detail changes, like
Sure.
color change on call to actions. But, who is it really going to have that much of an impact on conversion rates? Or having an orange call to action button versus a black button? Maybe it will, but if we constantly rely on those tiny changes,
Will take too
you'll
much
probably
time.
find,
Yeah.
based on what the markets have found, like, they don't have a big enough impact. And this was reinforced as well. I had a good corporate visit with the team in UNICEF Australia just over a year ago, where we went to see one of the big banks in Sydney. And this the UNICEF Australia team they've got a decent sized team, or they did back then, of digital specialists. There's probably 5 of them who came, but it was a couple of their jobs on a part-time basis to do A/B testing, whereas this bank had a team of like 5 people again that were full-time focused on user experience and A/B testing. That was their full-time job. But there was lots of principles of testing that UNICEF Australia were following really well compared to the bank. And one of the things they discussed was, this game-changing test and being able to reach a result more quickly. And it particularly applies here because the population's so small, or relative to China. So you've got 25 million people, and your addressable audience might be half that if you're lucky. So, and then your actual audience reach based on your budget is much smaller. So you've got to have like big differences to get to a result.
So that's what you mean by game-changing test. Really, like, really like a totally different proposition, totally different creative execution.
Yeah.
Something. That's the big thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But the key thing with that China example is really just the work they put into making it work super well on a mobile device. And this is something, so Dips, who deal with your fundraising site, where you've got a lot of the flexibility to do this kind of experience. I've explained this to the team there on a few occasions, and I think they get it. I sense sometimes when I talk to them a bit of cynicism, that they're not fully bought into it.
Explain what?
Not that they say anything, they agree, but just when someone's agreeing without really believing.
What was it that you were explaining to them about testing?
Sorry, no, about using like a dedicated mobile approach that tells a story.
Oh, I see.
They get the need for mobile friendliness, but I think their view on it is a very traditional kind of like e-commerce. Like, if you're selling something on a phone, you have the products front and center, then you have a big call to action and people buy it. But obviously we know, like, interacting with a charity and getting a donation is quite a different experience. People are not looking, they don't get benefit from it. So you've got to get them involved, and to do that, it needs a really slick experience. So that's kind of been a conversation with Dips. The other context to give you on all of this is that, like, probably going back just over a year, the clear recommendation that we made to the office was that they needed to have somebody probably on a full-time basis for a period of at least 3 months, if not 6, to run this project. Because to develop that experience from scratch, for a country and test it properly from end to end. So really, the starting point before you even do the build would be testing the issue and the messaging on social media and seeing what gets the highest engagement rate, and then going, right, it's water and sanitation with this message that worked, so let's build it into a landing page. Okay, that landing page seems to be getting a bit of traction. Let's improve the landing page experience. So our point to Gregor at the time was that Wickham doesn't have the capacity to do this by himself. He should definitely be involved in it because he knows so much about the organization. But on top of all the other stuff he was doing and probably still is doing, it needed this additional support. And I'd imagine even with you on board that it probably still needs somebody who is only doing that for 3 months to really make it work with your expertise, Wickham's expertise, and other people influencing it to really, really push it along and give it a shot. Otherwise, like what I fear will happen is that we'll want to do it and we'll try and do it, and we just won't necessarily have the capacity to give it the effort that we need, or it'll turn into like a one-off campaign for whatever the issue is that we're doing the campaign around. It'll be built and it won't work because we haven't followed it through from the very beginning and tested the proposition all the way through to building something that is hopefully going to maximize conversion.
If I could recap what I think this is that you want concerted focus on, someone here working with the agency to develop this thing, it's a sort of user journey like thing, all the way from the first instance of seeing a little bit of an ad somewhere or something, right, and then all the way down to clicking donate, and kind of there are various paths to this. You can tell the story in different places. It could be partly on, we talked about this a little bit with Frida and Wiccan. They've seen some evidence of how this can work differently. One of the discoveries was when the DTP site went live, they suddenly found a whole lot of traffic coming over onto the donation site and converting and such.
Yeah.
And then so this whole idea of, if we have fundraising oriented type stories on the website, right, that could, be, let's say, kind of like a finite subset of quasi landing pages on the website itself, right? And then from there, you go to a straight donation page. Then, you've sort of primed the user to see the story on the website. And when you get to the donation page, it's just, okay, get the transaction done. But in other flows where you're going straight from ad to donation page and there's no context, then maybe you need a landing page that has a little bit more of that context. And so, we can test kind of various combos of this and see,
Yeah.
And I guess the capacity or the willingness to build in the space and time and to make sure we allocate the budget and all of that, the agency priority to building out all those different paths and then testing and measuring it properly and all. Is that the sort of it that you were referring to, or are you thinking of something else?
No, I think you're on the right track there. It literally covers everything from, what's the campaign going to be about to how is it messaged? It's having somebody that can take on that full thing as a project, but then all the way through to the end result. So what's the best possible way to drive the traffic? And then when the traffic's there, how do we convert the traffic? So off the back of that conversation around, having a really slick mobile experience, it's actually, if you take it back a few steps and go, well, before we even spend too much time designing that, let's make sure we've got a really solid proposition that we're confident is going to work and has been tested, and go with that. And the very basic way, and I can do this in the next session, is show you a case study from Korea who had done, who followed this exact approach with how they develop propositions. And they actually, it wasn't Facebook, or was it? I think they did a bit on Facebook actually, proposition testing, where their initial draft of a proposition might just be an image with a couple of paragraphs of copy, and then they promote that $100 per variation to an audience and see which gets the highest engagement rate, and use that as a basis for jumping off and developing it further.
Right. Yeah. I thought I made a note of that suggestion. The sort of using our social media communities as sort of a testing lab for, as you call it, proposition, concept, message testing.
Yeah.
See how that turns out, and then at least we have a sort of higher confidence in putting the effort into building donation pages around said kind of tests.
Yeah, that's definitely cool. Okay. But listen, I've got to wrap up pretty quickly.
No, I
know you've got a lot on as well. Yeah, but
stuff, man.
Hopefully that was useful. I know I've gone over quite a lot. That presentation was almost like a 2-hour session with a big group of people, and we had a lot of conversation around different challenges. So, I mean, you'll get to do all that hopefully when the different conferences happen. There'll be different people presenting at them, and it's a really good opportunity. We can actually present it as part of this to showcase some of the work that he had done in Indonesia on infrastructure.
Okay.
I can share all of that with you.
Fantastic, John. Thanks again. Very helpful once again, and appreciate it. I'll ping Filippo, copy you quickly again, just to wanted to try and close the loop on that whole Caesar thing.
Just make sure it's on his radar, because there's a lot of conversations happening across the region and globally as well around tracking. So just making sure it's on his radar, and we can get it done.
I totally am. Yeah. All right, man. Thanks a lot.
All right, have a good day. Cheers, Kuan. Thank you. Good talking to you.
Yeah, bye-bye. Bye.